He was young. So anyway, without further ado, Brian, come forward, please. Let's turn you on. And hopefully at the end, you'll talk a little bit about your special program you do at tours.
We'll do. Okay,
Yeah.
Is that, everybody can hear that okay?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
great.
Bill Bacon, I ought to just highlight, another one of our board members, went with Brian Cheryl to Cuba, and he did a marvelous tour of that as well. So anyway.
All right, thank you,
Are
Mike.
you turned on?
I'm ready. I'm going right now. Everybody hear that okay? All right. All right, well, thanks for coming out on this chilly morning. And we'll talk about World War I. 100 years ago, right now, you know, the leaders of the Allied States were gathered in Paris at the Paris Peace Conference that came up with 5 different treaties. One of them, the one we all know, is the Treaty of Versailles. But that was just one of 5 that ended the war. That was the Treaty of Versailles was only with Germany. We had a separate one with Turkey, a separate one with Austria, a separate one with Bulgaria, all the various Central Powers. But all the leaders 100 years ago right now in April were gathered in Paris. Another thing about history, I think about it all the time. This week for me, I do the Civil War a lot. On the 9th, just a few days ago, was when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. And tomorrow, the 14th, that was Palm Sunday. 5 days later, on Good Friday, Abraham Lincoln went to a play at Ford's Theater. So that'd be tomorrow. So, and with that, into the Civil War, the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson at this time, was a young boy growing up in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And so he's tied into that Civil War as well. Today we're going to talk about the end of that war and the role of the U.S. Army in that, in ending the Great War, and then what happens immediately thereafter. I've got 130 slides. That's a lot. We're going to go through a lot very, very, very quickly. I've got some maps. The photos were pretty much all taken by my lovely wife, Cheryl, and we'll just talk through those as we go fairly chronologically. So this is in a painting. It's in the Eastern train station in Paris, the Gare de l'Est. And from that train station, most of the French army would embark and then head off to the front. And so every soldier would go through there. And in the early 1920s, this painting was made. And it shows a young man here. Where's my? Excited to go. He's got it right. He's got flowers out of his rifle, his hats. And then some of the people are feeling a little bit anxious, but he's ready to go. And the young men are off to war. And that painting still stands. It's from the 1920s. It stands in that train station today. Here's the United States Congress in April 1917 after the Zimmerman telegram where the Germans told Mexico, hey, we're going to start unrestricted submarine warfare again, and it'd be a great thing if you go ahead and attack America from the south and you can have Texas and New Mexico back. Well, those two things, the unrestricted submarine warfare and that Zimmerman telegram, lead President Wilson to come before Congress and ask for a declaration of war. That happens April 6, 1917. This is just a map showing the various combatants. So we've got Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire were called the Central Powers. The main allies are Great Britain, France, and Russia, and then later Italy will join in and Serbia and the rest. Italy not till 1915. And then of course we're going to come in. We're a neutral power from 1914 to 1917. Though in general we're looking to support the Allies, but we're neutral. The Western Front was where the Americans are going to fight most, so we'll focus on that, but there are other fronts. This particular one shows the main German attack, the Schlieffen Plan of 1914, and this is as far as they got, and then they push back. This brown line is where everything, pretty much 1914 to 18 is, and then the Germans will do another attack in 1918, and that's where the U.S. is going to get involved. But it's not just a Western Front. This is a world war. We wouldn't call it the World War if we were just talking about this Western Front in France. So there are other places. There's the Italian front in 1918, and that's where the Austrian army is facing off against the Italians. We've got an American regiment down there, 3,000 guys in 1918 as well. So not a whole big American presence, but mainly it's up by Venice. Here's Venice, up into Austria. This is the main front. Alps down to the coast. Salonika in Greece, and you got the Greek army, the Serbian army, a French army, and a British army facing off against Austrians and Germans. This is going into Thrace, so right over here is Constantinople. Down here is going to be towards Athens. This is right where Greece turns into Turkey. Macedonia, Montenegro, and the rest. So that's a huge front. Not Americans there, but a huge front in the war. Palestine. So you got a whole British army and Australians, New Zealanders. I've led a staff ride of Beersheba with my officers, as well as the capture of Jerusalem as well. That's 1917. And then an Arab army against 3 Turkish and German armies. This battle up here at Megiddo, that's where we get the term Armageddon, by the way, is Megiddo from the Bible. That campaign of September 1918 is probably the best example of modern warfare out of World War I. Air, tanks, vehicles, as well as cavalry and the rest, all the combined arms aspects of World War I, probably the greatest battle to demonstrate what will happen later with World War II. East Africa in 1918. So what we talk today we'd call Tanzania, German East Africa. Here's the Indian Ocean, Zanzibar, and all the rest. And so all of this is a major campaign. In the Pacifics, this is all German. We know the Marianas and the Carolines and the Marshalls, all that stuff from World War II. Those all belong to Germany in World War I, as well as a good chunk of New Guinea. All this, Rabaul, the Bismarck Islands, Bismarck Archipelago. And so there's going to be a campaign in the Pacific, and Japan is going to get all of these, and that's going to lead to issues in World War II, but another campaign there. And then setting up the Western Front for 1918, the biggest issue of these other fronts is the collapse of Russia. I mean, Russia is tying down 1 million German soldiers over there, but their country collapses in 1917, and then the Germans force a treaty in early 1918. Russians lose all of this, and the Germans are able to then take all their men and move them to the Western Front, and that's going to present us with the problems that we're going to have on the Western Front. Okay, and now those other fronts, there's some trenches, but it's not like it is. The Western Front is dominated by this trench warfare for 4 years, and that's kind of what it looks like on the Somme. So this is there's the trench and there's the support trench, and these are just some of the artillery holes. But that is the problem that people have been facing for 4 years. How do we break this trench warfare? And the Germans come up with an idea of training stormtroop tactics. So they take half their army, 45% of their army, and train it up as specially organized guys to work at squad level and platoon level, surrounded by a machine gun, and just swarm the enemy, find a weak point, get through it, and go deep. And then everybody else then call back, hey, here's where the weak point is, and then others follow through. And so you get way deep behind the enemy. So they create that force, train it up in the winter of 1917-18, and in 1918 they unleash it in what's called Operation Michael. And so this has been this red line has been the trench for 4 years, and this is the amount of gain. And the only people have been gaining, hundreds of yards, maybe a mile, all along here for 4 years. But the Germans grab each of these huge areas and press on towards Paris. Massive gains that haven't been seen since 1914 based on those stormtroop tactics. And that's the situation when the Americans are coming in. We've been in a war since 1917, but we're gradually building up our forces, training them. We're not ready for war. I mean, we got a tiny little army. We're going from 100,000 men to, by the end of the war, 3 million men. And so we got this tiny thing growing and training, and all of a sudden when we start landing in France, the Germans are doing this type of an attack. This is another picture just showing those great gains, which are 80 miles deep, 100 miles deep, that just have not been seen, and it throws the Allies into a panic. And so the Allied commanders, we hadn't had a supreme commander to that point. There'd been a French army commander, and Pétain is the French army commander now. There's a British army under Haig. There's an American army under Pershing. But at this point, the Allies get together to include the presidents and prime ministers, and they say, we need one person, put under one person. And so Ferdinand Foch, the French marshal, is put in charge. He's like the Eisenhower of World War I. And so he comes up with the plans that we're going to operate on. Just for the forces, the British Expeditionary Army up here under Haig, the Belgian Army is included under his command. There's a French corps up there with them too. And then several French army groups. I mean, that's an army group, but look, 1, 2, 3, 4 French army groups, and then the American army over here. This shows, let me go back real quick. So this is the areas where the Germans are going to make these Operation Michael, major attacks. Like that's March, that's April, that's March. And so different times they're doing the attacks. the Americans get thrown in. Pershing, who wanted to keep our army together, part of his thoughts going over there is we're going to fight only as an American army. I'm not going to dissipate our regiments out and battalions out to other people's command. Well, in this desperate situation, he says, okay, for right now, I'm going to let you guys have some of our troops, but they're going to fight as at least division size. And so we're going to have 2 divisions up north, the 2nd Corps helping up here. Later, it will be brought down and participate here. The 1st Division gets thrown, they've been there since June 1917, the Big Red 1. They're going to fight the first battle at Cantigny in May. And then we're going to help stop the major German advance of Michael here. And then we're going to start the counterattack, Saint-Mihiel salient. And then the largest battle in American history, the Meuse-Argonne. Bigger than, the second biggest is Battle of the Bulge, but Meuse-Argonne is quite a bit larger than that. This will be the last final offensive here. So that's where we're fighting, but that's quite a difference. That 2nd Corps of 2 divisions that fight is in the summer. It's brought down and fights here in October, but we put another corps of 2 divisions that's fighting here at the end of the war. So we're still spread out quite a ways, but most of us only know about this part here. I mean, that's the big part, but in reality, we've got, a couple different corps over in other places. This is the Battle of Cantigny. That's the first fight. 28th Regiment of the Big Red 1. Going to seize that town from the Germans. This again is the Germans have been making their advance in Michael. Now we go in. It's going to be our first battle. It's going to be successful. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is a battalion commander there. Later will be a regimental commander and severely wounded. Of course, we know he fought at D-Day later on at Utah Beach. This is the American Memorial. So after the war, we created something called the American Battlefields Monument Commission. If you go to Europe or you go to Philippines or you go to Italy, anywhere we fought in World War I, World War II, there are memorials, monuments, and cemeteries. So there's no cemetery at Cantigny, but there's a memorial. And the guy who was put in charge of doing all this after the war in 1923, 24, 25, was General Pershing. And his assistant was Colonel Marshall, George Marshall. And so the 2 of them went around, picked what spots on the battlefield exactly they would put these memorials and markers and cemeteries. I mean, Pershing personally selected based on where the Americans had fought. And so this is the American memorial there. The Americans attacked from out of this wood line back here across these fields against German machine gun fire to seize this town. The next fight is also part of that German offensive Michael. They'd come towards Paris and a place called Chateau-Thierry along the Marne River, which runs into Paris. We've got Belleau Wood and Chateau-Thierry. And here the 2nd Infantry Division is going to be going into Belleau Wood. The 3rd Infantry Division is going to go in here. That's the Marne River. Anybody know what is the nickname of the 3rd Infantry Division to this day?
Rock of the Marne.
The Rock of the Marne. That's right.
Pretty good for a Navy guy.
Yeah, that's right. It really was. But this is where they get their name, is this spot right here. But these guys come out from Paris on trucks that day. They drive straight out on trucks on a little road, get off, and go right into the fight. The 2nd Infantry Division has an U.S. Army brigade and a Marine brigade. The Marines did not want to be left out of World War I, and so they lobbied to be able to go. They gathered all their Marines from all over and created a brigade. And that brigade goes into this fight, and on the 6th of June, 1918, the U.S. Marine Corps loses more men in 6 hours than they had lost in the entire existence of the Marine Corps to that date. This is the Marine Corps Memorial in Belleau Wood. This carved or designed by the same man who the Iwo Jima Memorial in Washington, D.C. There it is again. So this is in the center of Belleau Wood. They still have the trenches in there, shell holes. It used to be a private hunting ground, a Frenchman's private hunting ground, like a local duke. Tough fighting. And this is where you get some of the great, Dan Daly, come on, you sons of bitches, did you want to live forever? Medal of Honor winner going across those fields.
Yeah, Brian, not to interrupt, what I found interesting is you could hardly see through the woods.
Yeah, right. And people could not, they got confused. The Marines, you read their memoirs, they said, you couldn't understand which direction was north, south, east, west. It was the most confusing fight any of them had ever imagined in their lives. And these were guys who later went on, guys who were commandants of the Marine Corps, and they said there was nothing ever like Belleau Wood for them. This is the American Cemetery. That's Belleau Wood behind it. So this is only 1,000 meters from that previous piece through the woods, and this is the in Marne American cemetery. There's about 4,000 Americans here. All of these are beautiful. And what's different about World War I and World War II from the American Battlefield Monument Commission, in World War I, there's a cemetery, and then somewhere nearby on an important, usually piece of high ground, Pershing placed a memorial that is a spectacular memorial that overlooks the battleground. In World War II, probably to save money, we put those together, and I'll show that with the Normandy Cemetery later. So the memorial and the cemetery are together for all the World War II cemetery, battlefields. In World War I, the cemetery is separate from somewhere nearby is the memorial. And this is it. This is the American memorial from this battle. It's Chateau-Thierry. And it's spectacular. The overlook from that over the Marne Valley and the battlefield is just unbelievable. And we'll do a close-up of those two female characters here. So on the left is France. On the right is France. On the left is the United States, and they're coming in to fight together. And on the backside, the American Eagle, and then a battlefield map. All of them have very nice battlefield maps describing the fight from that area. And this is "Time Will Not Dim the Glory of Their Deeds" is on all of the American Battlefield Monument Commission memorials and cemeteries. Anybody see that World War I movie that just came out with Peter Jackson, the colorized version? Yeah, that was spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, one thing you told us was interesting when we were there was that the Nazis didn't destroy these monuments.
Right. No, they didn't. But this particular one is shot up. There are bullet holes as the backside. On this side here, there are a number of bullet holes because there was a battle there in 1940, the Germans against the French, and they just machine gun fire. And Americans left the marks on the memorial. This is down in the town of Chateau-Thierry itself, and that's a monument to the 3rd Infantry Division, both for World War I and World War II. This piece here talks about what they did in World War I. That talks about what they did in World War II. But the 3rd Division has a very, because it's known as the Rock of the Marne, what they did there in May, June, July of 1918 was important. This is the French memorial at Dormans. This was put up by Foch in the 1920s because this second Battle of the Marne. First Battle of the Marne was stopping the Germans in 1914. The second battle was this May-June fight of 1918, and it's a spectacular memorial there on the high ground.
So the 4th Infantry Division, excuse me for interrupting, they are as well the Rock of Marne. That was my unit, 1st Brigade, 4th Infantry Division. That's what we wore, was the Rock of Marne.
Yeah, they're going to be right up in here going in. That's 4th Division up here. This is now, there's the Marne River running towards Paris. This is Chateau-Thierry area. This is the Belleau Wood. So here's where we stop. This is the German attack. This is the line from 1914 to 1918. This is how much ground the Germans gained in about 4 days. They just blew through the French line and got all the way down the Marne River, and the French and us stopped them here. And this is where the line stays until July, like mid-July. And by this time, Foch knows the German plans. We were able to ascertain what they're going to do next. And we know that their very next attack is going to be this dotted line right here. The Germans have, as their last massive attack, because what's happened, remember I said they developed all these stormtroopers. Well, when you fight the way they did for 3 months, those guys have been ground up now and almost all gone. And now by taking all this best NCOs and soldiers and training them up specially, you've created an elite. But now your elite's been ground down, and now you got your secondary and third type of units. Well, this is their last gasp attack to get to Paris is going to be here. Foch knows, we know what's going to happen. So Foch tells the Americans, let them get across the river, back up, absorb the fight, and as soon as they've kind of thrown their punch, then we're going to come back. And there's going to be an attack along the entire front, from Belgian border all the way down. And so this is it. The Germans do this attack. This is where the 3rd Division gets its name, the Rock of the Marne, here. And then we do our counterattack. And this shows we're going to take back this whole thing in about 6 weeks, because now we're fighting uphill. Germans were fighting downhill. We're fighting back uphill. The blue is the Americans. So these are American divisions fighting on through here. This is going to be American corps. All the rest of this is by the French going in here. But we're going to take all this ground back. This is the town of Meuse-Argonne right there on the river. This is the church in that town. But this is where we stand with our group, and this is right across the Marne River. This is the spot where the 3rd Division stops them. And then this is what they had. Once they cross the river, they got to go up that slope. That's the Germans on top of that thing, right across the river. up that wide open slope and then into those woods, and then it continues on up to the Inn River. Beautiful terrain, though. And this is Champagne region. All these fields are Champagne. We get up to something called the Red Cross Farm, and this is where the 42nd Division comes in. And no unit, it was the second most casualties, but nobody fought in the line as long as the 42nd Division, which remember is the Rainbow Division, has men from every state involved in that. Regiments from Alabama, Iowa, New York. This was a difficult fight in that counteroffensive. This monument was put up by a Alabama man whose father fought in this battle, and he became wealthy afterwards, and so he had this built. His father is this man here, is a sergeant holding one of his soldiers who'd been killed. The artist, the artist went so far as to, there's some dog tags hanging off of the dead soldier, and they belong to a 42nd Division soldier who's in the cemetery nearby. So it's incredibly impactful. All four sons of President Roosevelt fought in the war. One of them was a battalion commander, later regimental commander Teddy Jr. Another served in the Mesopotamian campaign to capture Baghdad. Another one was a company commander on the Western Front. And the youngest, 20 years old, Quentin Roosevelt, left Harvard and went to fight as an Air Corps. He was trained as a pilot, and on his second week of flying was shot down in July, very near that last monument we saw. And President Roosevelt was heartbroken, and he and his wife built a memorial to him, to Quentin Roosevelt. And they wanted something practical for the people of this tiny little town. And so they said, what would be useful? And they said, we'd like a water fountain for the horses and all. And so that's what they did with some dedication to their son. And he was buried at American Cemetery. He was killed right out here in this field, by the way. That's where he was shot down. The Germans buried him. They realized who it was. They got the message to the Allies, hey, President Roosevelt's son is killed. We buried him with full military honors. He was put in the American Cemetery nearby at Wazin for many years. When his older brother, died in World War II, got the Medal of Honor for his actions at Utah Beach, they brought both brothers together and buried them at Normandy. So if you go to the Normandy American Cemetery, the Roosevelt brothers are side by side there now. This is the Wazin Cemetery where he was buried. About 5,000 Americans there. We were here on the 4th of July, which was a very, very special day to be there. Those of us in this picture here, all of us had relatives who served in World War I. My grandfather, Bill Beering, was in the 42nd Division from Colorado. This is his map from his regiment, 165th. This is from 1919. It was made while they were on occupation duty in Germany, put up together by his G2 section. But it shows every single movement by day of the 42nd Division, by rail or by truck or by marching. And at the end of the battle, right here's where the Meuse-Argonne offensive ends. Then it shows how many 20 miles a day as they marched their way to occupy the Rhine River at Koblenz here, where that was made. His brigade commander, my grandfather's brigade commander, was Mike Fellows' wife, great-grandfather. So Mike and I have that, share that. This is the 4th of July, and again, we brought these flowers, had these put together, a wreath, and laid those at the memorial. Again, her grandfather commanded the Engineer Brigade of the 3rd Division. Their great-grandfather was involved with the 28th Division at maybe the bloodiest fight of all of World War I. My grandfather fought in the 42nd throughout. His wife's great-uncle was in the 5th Division. Dave, what was your tie again?
I don't remember what he was saying, but he was in the major battle.
Right. That's Dave in the cemetery there. American flag. We happened to be there right when it was time to bring the flag down at retreat, 5 o'clock. And so it was an extra-sized American flag on the 4th of July, and all of us were able, along with the superintendent, the American superintendent of the cemetery, and there's a French guard, were able to and this young man here, he's an active duty Army lieutenant. He brought the flag down, and then all of us shared in folding it. This is where their theme is nearby. So this is the last battle of that counteroffensive. And this is a bridge put together by the state of Pennsylvania in the 1920s. The 28th Division captured this town. It was urban fighting. You don't think about that too much. Probably the fiercest urban fighting on the Western Front of World War I was when the 28th Division crossing this little river called the Belleau. and they got one battalion across the river when the Germans came in behind them and cut them off. And for the next 3 weeks, we were having to swim across the river to get supplies. And at the end, the Germans counterattacked with stormtroops, flamethrowers, and all, and wiped out that American battalion. Unbelievable tough fight. And the state of Pennsylvania put up this memorial to honor them. And the French, I said before, Foch put up the big memorial at Dormans to commemorate, we've stopped the Germans at the Second Battle of the Marne. Well, then they put up another memorial to celebrate this counterattack. And this is it at a place called Butte de Chaumont. And again, that's the type of terrain that the Americans and French are going across. Lots of woods, but lots of open ground, which of course, obviously machine gun, artillery, mortars are going to cover. This is it's called the Ghost. French, it's phantoms. For us, we would say the Ghosts. This is built in 1923. The artist didn't let anybody see it until it was done. The French government paid for it. And he was a very famous artist. But when you look at these things up close, when you're looking at them, the eyes are glazed over and they're ghosts. I mean, the French lost so many people in this war. I mean, it's just like we have seen the worst, and we are the ones that, you've survived, we're here to tell the tale. One man, naked, is kind of like an angel ascending into heaven. And some people were unhappy with it when it came out, but over time it's become exceedingly well accepted. This goes up, is going to run through some of the other areas Americans are fighting in. This is up in Belgium. This is the terrain by the town of Ypres. If you've ever heard of the Ypres salient or Ypres, this is the fighting, the terrain up there. And American 2 divisions are going to be fighting up there. 4 different total, 2 at a time, but 4 American divisions against the German attacks of 1918. And this is now a lake of peace. An Englishman bought this acre of ground and then turned it into a garden, turned it into a lake. That was a shell hole. It's probably about 40 foot deep as well. And that's a mine. The British blew up. It's the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. And there were 8 mines that detonated in 1917 to get the Germans off of this ridge, which is just a kilometer away from, let me go back to that previous picture. Just looking out here, that's where that area is. That ridge, the British blew up these mines under the Germans. And an Englishman who survived it, the battle, bought that land afterwards and turned it into a lake of peace, a peace park. We got the 2 divisions that had fought up north under 2nd Corps in Belgium were brought down in October and were part of the British attempt to break the Hindenburg Line. The Hindenburg Line at that area, at San Quentin Canal, runs underground for a couple of miles. Napoleon built this canal system and this tunnel back in 1809. And the Germans filled it up with boats and thousands of men under there that could not be affected by shell fire and anything else, and then it would just come out. They had ways to get out and then fight. The Americans would be attacking from this way over here. But it was a rat's nest to be able to fight through that. This is the American memorial at San Quentin Canal. And again, a map, I'm pointing something out. And showing where those 2 divisions are coming through against the canal. And they're going to fight under that British command and control throughout the rest of the war. So 2 American corps are going to be fighting with the British throughout. This is the American cemetery nearby, that one. Beautiful Somme American. This is Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. The very first American officer killed in World War I was Lieutenant Fitzsimmons in 1917. And that's him right here. I'll picture that. Under French command and control throughout the end of the war in October, November, we had another American corps who fought at a place called Mont Blanc Ridge, White Mountain Ridge. Truly brutal fight. They had to go across 2 miles of open ground uphill to get to the German position. Tough fight. 2nd Infantry Division and the 36th Division out of Oklahoma, Texas. This shows a French cemetery that's nearby. There are 30-some thousand men buried in this cemetery. And this, I like this photo, it shows also the Islamic soldiers, Muslim soldiers in the French army, guys from Tunisia and Algeria and the rest. There's a German cemetery across the hill with another 15,000 men. There's over 50,000 men buried within a couple of acres right there. Okay, now we'll get into our Western Front that we're probably more familiar with, and that's two different campaigns, the Saint-Mihiel salient and then the Meuse-Argonne. The Saint-Mihiel salient is our first American Army operation. We'd been fighting since May. I mean, all these things I've talked about, Cantigny, the in Marne campaign, but we were operating as separate divisions or on somebody else's command and control. Even if we were a corps, those fights that going up through from the Marne River and Chateau-Thierry up to Fiume, we had two American corps fighting, but they were under French command and control. In August, Pershing creates the American First Army and brings everything back under American control, about 90% of the forces, and he wants to run an operation to just work out the kinks before we do something really big. And for a long time, this salient had been, a long time, 4 years, this salient had bulged into the French lines. And Pershing had looked at it on the map. As soon as he'd arrived in France in 1917, he said, I know I want to do an operation sometime. Can I do that? And at the time, the French said yes. And so we've been planning to do this operation for a year and a half. And now we're ready to do it in September. And Foch says, I don't want you to do that now. That doesn't matter. I've got everything, got the Germans, we've blunted their attack. We now can go on the offensive. I got this massive offensive and we're going to do this something different. Pershing says, we got to do something first. I got to do this. I've already planned. I've already moved the troops over. So Foch says, okay, you got 3 days to do it. And then you got to move your forces 100 miles and get them ready. And George Marshall is the guy who made that happen. I mean, it's one of the greatest logistics to shift an army, which is much larger than World War II armies, to shift it from this direction to this direction. It makes Patton's bulge thing look like child's play. I mean, it's incredible, and George Marshall made it happen. But we're going to do this attack. A couple of American corps on the south side, American corps on the north side. The French are going to hold the back of the pocket, and the Americans are going to pinch it off. And it's going to work. In 3 days, it's going to be incredibly successful. The Germans were kind of withdrawing. We kind of helped usher them out. The Germans knew what was getting ready to happen. At this spot right here, Mont Sec is a piece of high ground. The American cemetery is over here. The American memorial's here. We'll see the picture. But about right here, Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur met Colonel George Patton for the first time on the battlefield. And they stood there talking, and German shell fire started coming in, and MacArthur refused to take a knee or do anything. And Patton said, I was, ready to pee my pants, but since he wasn't getting away, then I wouldn't either. And he said, we were both pretty stupid. This is the American Memorial at Mont Sec. Beautiful memorial with incredible views. That's one of the views from it up top. Again, you can imagine the openness of that terrain. This is the American cemetery nearby Saint-Mihiel. Look at the difference. It's the German cemetery of Saint-Mihiel. American. Pretty stark. The German cemeteries, cemeteries, whether you look at the British one or a French one or a German American, they tell a little bit about the culture that they come from. And the German ones are always built in these nice trees and all that. It makes me think of the Black Forest. I mean, the Germans are always in the Black Forest.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The thing that I found interesting is the American cemetery, although it's a graveyard, it's so pristine. When we went to the German one, all of the crosses are black.
Yep. Yeah.
1 to 4 guys are buried in each one.
Yeah, you go to Normandy, the American cemetery has 9,000 individual graves. The Germans have 23,000 in much smaller areas. They bury them in 4 of them on top of each other. Yeah, but they're all beautiful in their way, but there's nothing like the American. I like the British ones. They look like an English garden, but it's just not like the American. This is the 1st Division Memorial, big red one. With an American eagle on top, wings wrapped around. The 1st Division and the 26th Division linked up and really cut the Saint-Mihiel salient. They both were racing to be the first one to the town to be able to say they got there first, and the 28th Division or 26th Division beat the 1st, which doesn't happen too often. Okay, that leads up. This was the Saint-Mihiel salient right here. So that was that little bulge that had been sticking out for years. And Americans have been planning for a year and a half to break it down. And Foch said, okay, you can do it, but you only got a couple of days because I need you right up here because now we're going to do what's called the 100 Days Offensive, but we call it now the 100 Days. Foch certainly didn't know it was going to take 100 days. It was just a massive offensive that's going to attack in September. The Germans' last gasp had been an attack up here in August. And 8th of August, the British and Canadians and Australians stop them. and it's called the Black Day of the German Army. For the first time, they start surrendering in pretty large numbers. And Ludendorff, the quartermaster general, Hindenburg's the overall commander, but everybody knows that Ludendorff's calling the shots. Ludendorff says, this is the Black Day of the German Army. We are now, something's happening. And pretty soon, they're already telling the Kaiser, hey, you better start looking for peace. Even in late August, they're saying, they've got the whole society behind them for 4 years, and now they say, okay, we failed. So you guys, politicians, better get some peace now. But this is the final offensive that's going to happen. A Belgian army group, really under a French army commander up there. The British army group, a French army group, French army group, American army, later to be an army group, French army group, French army group. I mean, France is really holding most of the stuff. The two main attacks, though, I mean, everybody's going to be going on the attack, but the two main impetus will be the American army group, with the French on either side helping, and the Canadian and Australian corps together as an army with other British helping out. These are going to be the two main offensives. And here's now we break it down to the American sector. These are American corps. Here's the 1st Army headquarters. Pershing is dual-hatted. He's the American commander of all American Expeditionary Forces. That includes hundreds of thousands of men who are stretching from Brest and Lorient all the way to the front. We've got regiments of people cutting down forests in southern France to bring the wood up to be able to make the roads, the corduroy roads and all the rest. So there are hundreds and thousands of men doing other things that aren't part of the 1st Army. And so Pershing's dual-hatted. Is that a good way to run a? Of course not. And so eventually he's going to decide to turn the 1st Army over, and he's going to create a 2nd Army, and eventually 3 days before the end of the war, a 3rd Army. But this is the way we're set up to do the assault. And our job is we follow the Meuse River and the Argonne Forest. And so that's incredibly difficult terrain as we're working our way up towards Sedan. This shows a number of American divisions that are involved in this. Each of those patches is another division, obviously. And this shows where they were kind of at the end. So we're starting from down here, working our way through towards Sedan. Rainbow Division, 2nd Division, 5th Division, all the rest. And in the big picture, that shows what the Americans are going to gain, what we're going to do in that attack. Straight on up. The first stop that we made was a place called Vauquois Hill. This had been under French and German control. Literally, it's a ridgeline with a small town on top, and the two sides were on either side, and they mined against each other for 4 years, just blowing it up and blowing it up. And this memorial's on the French side. There's where the town used to be up on top of the hill. This is what it looks like today. I mean, that's a crater. They mined and just, for 4 years, they were just killing each other. We seized that on the first day. 36th Division and Harry Truman's troops come through there on the first day, September 28th, and help capture that. And we move on that same day, the 28th Division, right to their left, captures the town of Varennes. And Pennsylvania built this memorial as well. There we are on the backside looking at it. The same guy, a guy named Kret, who designed all the memorials for the American government, Pennsylvania hired him to build their memorial, so they look very similar in a way. The first major objective of Pershing in this assault was the high ground, a ridge just a couple kilometers beyond what we were just looking at, a place called Mont Falcon, Falcon Mountain. And the Germans had built a observation post that could see for 20 miles south and control all the advance. So Pershing knows we got to capture that, take away their eyes, and this is that area. So they got a old monastery from like 800 AD on top that's fallen apart over the years. But that's the American memorial on top now. From the other side.
Hell of a climb.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now this is the remains of that monastery. The commander of the German army group in the area was the Crown Prince of Germany. See this right here? See that gap? The Germans had created an observation post in there, hidden amongst the ruins. That was the Crown Prince's observation post where he could look for 20 miles and see all the American advances coming through. And it used to be so hard to be able to see that from anybody else's point of view. Here we are having lunch. And then again, the markers on are showing how many American divisions were involved in this fight and what fights they were in. That shows the stairway to the top. This gentleman had just flown in that day. He's an American. His uncle had served in World War I. And he's 80 years old. He had just flown in with his uncles. It smelled like mothballs. He'd been in mothballs at home. He decided, I've got to come over to France. I've never been here. And so he and his wife came in, and he had just got off the plane, driven out, and was there that day, and he climbed to the top of that. And then we saw him at other battlefields throughout the day. I mean, he was getting around. We stopped by the Lost Battalion, if you're familiar with that story. We're from the 77th Division. One battalion got far ahead of the others that couldn't keep up with their pace. The Germans came in behind them, and for the next 5 days, that battalion was stuck. And we've had other battalions that's happened to through the war, but there were so many media people, writers at the headquarters at that time that it became a story back in the States immediately. And everyone said, we've got to relieve this lost battalion. And they held out against overwhelming odds down in this low ground here. And when they finally were relieved, part of it was getting the message out to exactly where they were. They'd lost all their pigeons. They had no radios, and telephone couldn't work. The Germans had cut the lines. German had them completely surrounded. They were down to their last pigeon. And the pigeon's name was Cher Ami, dear friend. And the battalion commander writes out the message, sends the bird up. It gets confused, comes back down. Sends it up again, and this time she flies away and makes it to the American headquarters. This is the monument memorial to the Lost Battalion here. Here's Cher Ami. She had the other eye is shot out when she landed with the message. One eye was missing. One of her feet was shot off, and she had a bullet right through her breast. She lived. And she's stuffed now. For a while, she's stuffed. She's in a monument down in Washington, D.C. That battalion commander, just a quick story about him, he became famous. I mean, he did an unbelievable job keeping his men alive and got them out of there. PTSD, unbelievable. He lost like 70% of his battalion, but he got the remainder out, but under overwhelming odds. When they dedicated the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in 1920, he was one of 4 American soldiers who were there to help dedicate that with the president. A week later, he got on a cruise ship to go to Havana, and he didn't make it. He jumped off. I mean, he couldn't. He had PTSD to the nth degree. And when you read the statements by his commanding officers and the others in 1920 at his funeral, they are using terminology that we would recognize today as being used. I mean, at the time, Patton's going to do, the slapping incident where he says, I don't think that's real. Well, these guys in 1920 knew it was real. This is further on in late September, early October. Our American Army, we were big, pretty well equipped, but we were not ready for modern warfare, and we were not ready to run corps and armies all that well. And so we launch out in this Meuse-Argonne offensive, take the initial objectives in the first couple of days, but then we get stopped. And for a long time, we just can't get it moving. Pershing realizes he can't do both things at once. He steps back from being the Army commander, takes his top corps commander, a guy named Hunter Liggett, who'd been effectively a combat corps commander since July. He'd been leading guys. He knew how to do this. He makes him the first Army commander. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief. Hunter Liggett really knows what he's doing, and Pershing can now focus on a bigger picture thing. And when we get started again in October, one of the first battles at a place called Canal, and we got 2 divisions going in to take it. And the Germans are up on high ground behind the town, small town, in the Bois, the woods of Canal. And we got the 5th Division on the left and the 3rd Division on the right. And the 5th Division is going to go through, and then the 3rd, and we're going to take this. And so this is the 5th Division jump-off line. There's a trench line that runs behind through these woods. This is Jackie and Jerry. Jackie's great uncle Jake was an infantryman that morning in that attack. And so it was great to have them right there. And then here we are. This is just where that previous picture was about right over here. Now here we are at the Bois de Canal, just a couple acres of woods. The town of Canal is just on our side. The German positions were in that woods and then behind. I had another, this woman here, her grandfather, his great-grandfather, was the engineer brigade commander of the 3rd ID. And again, her great uncle was the infantryman in the 5th ID. When we take these trips, if somebody has a relative in, I do some research and try to get them to the spot where their relative served, and we could talk a little bit about that story. And so I knew based on their, especially her information about her grandfather, a full colonel, that they'd served in the Canal on that day. I eventually found a memoir from a guy from a different division, a machine gun company commander in these woods. He'd been there for 2 weeks. The rest of his division was across the Marne in a different operation, but he'd been left in this critical piece. I found his memoir, read through all of it, and at his last one, he got pulled out this day because he was relieved by, as he writes, the Engineer Brigade of the 3rd. But what he writes, he says, the regiment of the 5th attacked in the morning through our position and into the town of Canal. Later that afternoon, the Engineer Brigade of the 3rd ID came in and replaced me. Because of that man's memoir, I was able to place these 2 women at the spot of their, the exact spot. That was pretty incredible. There they are again. Nearby from this is the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery. So we had the American Major Memorial for Meuse-Argonne was at Mount Falcon. This is the cemetery. It's the largest American cemetery in Europe. The biggest American cemetery of all, I think 16,000 soldiers, 17,000, is in Manila. The second largest is Meuse-Argonne with 14,000. We led 2 trips here. This one here, you can see the trees are different. This one here is November. This is probably at November 9th. The group that Dave and Arliss were on was in July. We went back in November with a small group to be there on the actual 11th of November, 1918. Perfectly aligned. Inside here is Freddie Stowers, who was a African American. Who we did not give these guys the awards that they deserved. He fought in a nearby battle called Seisho, and later in the 80s was finally given the Medal of Honor for that fight. The Germans, they were attacking. This was from the 93rd American Division under French command. We didn't even let them be under American command. We said, "You French, you can use our blacks. We don't want them." And so under French command, right to the left of us, his regiment's going across very difficult terrain. And the Germans, as they're getting ready to attack this trench, the Germans kind of raise their hands up and act like they've surrendered. And so the American, his company, gets out and starts coming across the open field. When they get halfway across in the wide open field, the Germans reach down and start mowing them down. His company commander and all the lieutenants are killed immediately. The men go down. This young corporal, 21 years old, gets up and says, "Follow me," and he leads them. He's going to get mortally wounded, but he got shot several times, up and down, but he gets his company across. They take the position, and much later he's given that Medal of Honor, as he should. We also visited some of our allies' pieces, and so this is the Verdun. Verdun is right next to us. It's literally at the jump-off point of the Meuse-Argonne offensive, so it's easy to get to and see. Over 1 million casualties in a 6-month period between the Germans and French. Unbelievable fighting. This is Fort Douaumont, and there's part of Fort Vaux. This is Cheryl, one of her, it's not favorite photos or monuments, but it's impactful. This is a German division right at as far as they got. And so the French built this memorial to that division saying this is a Bavarian, the Bavarian lion, the lion of Bavaria lies dead. This is as far as they got. Our base for this was the town of Reims, and Reims Cathedral, very famous. 80% of French kings since Clovis in 500 AD have received their crowns here. It doesn't happen at Notre Dame. It's not in Paris. It's out in Reims because Clovis received his crown there. And so this is where they all go and win. And this is where Joan of Arc, during the 100 Years' War, wins the Battle of Orleans. And then she brings that French king. He hasn't got his crown yet. She brings him there. She's 18 years old. And she brings him here and gets him crowned. This is one of the statues. She's sitting right over here. Just smiling face angel. Her head is knocked off during this battle. This is when the Germans are held accountable for World War I, this is one of the reasons, because of the library up at Louvain in Belgium and the destruction of the Reims Cathedral. The Germans purposefully target to try to destroy this cathedral because of what it means to France. And so when we're talking about war crimes, this is considered one of the major ones. It's also, by the way, where Eisenhower's headquarters was, his last headquarters in World War II. So the German surrender to Eisenhower happened here at a schoolhouse nearby. It's still a school to this day. Now it's called the Franklin Roosevelt High School, but the Memorial Museum for Eisenhower is great. We're going to take a group there next year for the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II there. We also visited the British, this is with our second group in November, the British Major Memorial at the Somme, Thiepval, and Vimy. This is November picture. Look at France in November. Pretty nice. This is November 10th. Prime Minister Trudeau was going to speak later that day here. This is the official Canadian memorial for World War I on Vimy, where they lost thousands of guys taking this ridge. The Australians, Villers-Bretonneux, we had 2 American divisions fight with them when they're taking the San Quentin Canal. This is where the Australian Memorial is. It's also beautiful. The Australians, 6 million people, they lost more killed than us in World War I. They lost 60,000 killed in battle. We lost 50,000 killed in battle. Little country of 5 million. In fact, at the peace conference, President Wilson is the chief of all the allies. I mean, there's the big 4. There's Lloyd George, Britain, Orlando of Italy, the Tiger, Clemenceau of France, and Wilson. But Wilson, based on the American strength by the end of the war, he's the chairman of the whole thing. And Hughes, the Prime Minister of Australia, is asking for a lot of stuff, and he's anti-Japanese. And Wilson says, listen, you're a little pipsqueak country. He goes, you're only speaking for 5 million people. And Hughes got back in his face and said, I speak for 60,000, more than you. With our last group, we went up to Ypres. The most important, British lost a lot of people in the Somme, but the place that captures the British imagination is the Ypres salient up in Belgium. And that's where their main memorials are. And at the town of Mons is where the British Expeditionary Force in 1914, August, came in, set up to try to stop the German onslaught in that Schlieffen Plan. And the very first British soldier killed in the war, August 23rd, 1914, is buried there. Also in that same little, and the Germans, so there's a big battle there in 1914. The Germans built a cemetery there because they'd lost a bunch. So in 1915, the Germans dedicated a nice cemetery, and they buried some Allied soldiers there, but it's a big German cemetery as well. In 1918, on November 10th, the British Army wants to recapture that town. Where the first battle was fought, they won it. And so they ordered the Canadians to go in on one last attack, and the Canadians captured it overnight on the 10th and 11th of November 1918. And the last British soldier killed in the war was a Canadian soldier 9 minutes before 11 o'clock, killed in the street. He's buried there too. And the Germans, the day before we got there, the German Chancellor Merkel and Prime Minister Theresa May were there at this cemetery because it's where the initial soldiers fought and died for both sides. And each of them laid a wreath right there. And the next day there was the major ceremony. There were thousands and thousands of people. We were there for the first part, and then we headed out. And I think it was Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were there to give the talks for the British side. But an amazing, this is again a beautiful cemetery put up by the Germans, but with Allied soldiers as well. But the first and last soldiers are buried about 10 yards apart from each other. This is in Ypres itself, the Cloth Hall. This is about the 4th of those famous destructive things that the Germans are held accountable for. This has all been completely rebuilt. These were destroyed down to ashes and then rebuilt in the way that they had been. And we were there on the 11th of November for the ceremony at 11 a.m. at the 100th anniversary. This is the Menin Gate. So coming from the back behind, there's the Cloth Hall back there. Through this street, there's an ancient fortified city, Ypres was, and there was an old gate there. Of course, it was destroyed during the war. I mean, the battlefront is only a couple miles away. But from this eastern gate, 1 million English soldiers at one time or another went to the front. And so the British, after the war, built this memorial. It's the most important British memorial of all World War I. It's called the Menin Gate. And the Belgians here, every day at 8 o'clock, hold a ceremony called Last Post. Every day since 1927. In 1940, when the Germans took over, the Germans didn't allow that to happen. But the Belgians, by thousands, had fled to England and then joined up and fought their way back. But in England, they carried on the Last Post tradition at their camp in England. And when came back and captured it in 1944, they started it again. But every night since 1927, there's been a ceremony called the Last Post, and it's pretty spectacular. But they did one at 11 a.m., obviously, for the ceremony. And Cheryl took these pictures. She was close in. I was with the party other group downtown. But this shows a bunch of roses being dropped through the centerpiece of the whole thing. For me, about a couple hundred yards back, I could see them fluttering through, which was really pretty spectacular. The war ends on November 11th when the Germans come and surrender to the French Supreme Commander Foch at a place called Compiègne, just north of Paris. Remember the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71, the Germans had taken from France Alsace and Lorraine. And those people wanted to be back into France. And so the Alsace and Lorraine people put this monument together to thank the French army for saving them and bringing them back into France. And so this shows a Prussian eagle with a French sword right through its breast here. Hitler had that taken apart. He didn't destroy it, but he had it taken apart and put away for storage when he came there in 1940. And there's the Marshal Foch. Now Hitler took down everything that was in there, all the memorials that were in that park, which are there today. He had them taken down. He took the train car and shipped it away and all. But he left Foch alone for whatever reason. I don't know, it was just saluting because this statue was already there from by 1930. Hitler left that statue there. But everything else ended up getting rebuilt. And there's the soldiers on that day. It's amazing how many men died on that last day, though. The last soldier to die in the war was an American 1 minute before them. He was a guy who had, down in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, and everybody knew the war was going to end. Everybody knew it was going to be 11 o'clock. People are firing, but you're not getting up and doing something stupid. He had a discipline problem, and he had a black mark against his name, and he said, I got to do something. And so he jumped up and went running down a road, charging a German machine gun position. The Germans fired off to the side, trying to deter him. What are you doing? And finally, he got too close, and they shot him, killed him. Wilson comes over in early December 1918, and we start the Paris Peace Conference, and it's going to go from January down till June. A couple days before it ends, the Germans' high seas fleet, who'd been taken, 77 warships, large battleships, battle cruisers, taken to Scapa Flow off the north part of the main British base off the north part of Scotland. And on June 21st, in protest about what was happening at Versailles, the German commander went ahead and scuttled the fleet, sank it. And that led to a couple days later on the 28th. And June 28th, 1914, 5 years before, the shooting at Sarajevo. So 5 years to the day is the signing of the Germans at the treaty. Okay, we'll go through real quick what happened because of this war is 4 empires. World War I is more important to me to World War II. 4 empires got destroyed. Germany ceased to exist, all their colonial conquests. Austro-Hungary turns into numerous countries. The Russian Empire goes away, and the Ottoman Empire. Germany's losses. Austria-Hungary again breaking into all these different countries. Yugoslavia gets created. The whole Middle East gets transformed with problems to this very day because of this. But Turkey gets created out of this and goes through its own civil war to chase the Greeks out. And but again, the French take over Syria, Lebanon, the British, Iraq, Palestine. Huge shortages throughout the war. And we all know about the Marshall Plan, right? But how many knew that Hoover did a similar thing? Not with the amount of money, but in a way came and saved Europe after World War I. Herbert Hoover, as a young man with American aid. The war doesn't end. That's the big thing, is that we think Treaty of Versailles ends this stuff. War continues, conflict continues, mainly Turkey and what's going on with them in the Middle East, but also Russia starts its own civil war. And Americans are going to be involved here too. We're going to have 5,000 men in a force up here and 10,000 coming in from Vladivostok. I'm wearing the Wolfhound crest. I'm a 27th Infantry Regiment guy. And we're called the Wolfhounds because of our service out of Vladivostok. And if you go to a Wolfhound battalion today, anywhere in Hawaii or other places they're stationed, they've all got a Russian Wolfhound as a mascot, and his name is Kolchak. The guy that we were supporting, the Russian white commander, was Admiral Kolchak. So to this day, we still maintain those traditions. So coming from Vladivostok, 10,000 Americans fighting here, 5,000 Americans fighting here. Of course, World War I is more important. The world changes because of World War I. And some of the things that happened because of the peace treaties and the rest, it's almost like a 30-year war from 1914 to 1945. And it's going to erupt again into World War II. we also went to, with Dave and Arliss to look at Overlord in World War II, and this is them in Bayeux, where the Bayeux Tapestry is, and just off the beach of Gold Beach. And this is the American cemetery there, and I said the difference from World War I to World War II is World War II, we put the memorial right in with the cemetery. So this is the American Memorial, has all the maps like the World War I, but it's within the cemetery. And this is one of my favorite pieces of art in the world, and that's this spirit of American youth rising from the waves. And a beautiful Normandy American Cemetery. But back to finish with World War I, it's the sacrifice. This brings us on truly onto the world stage. And again, my grandfather here, 42nd Division Croix Rouge Farm, American soldiers. Here's another American soldier. He was a young artist, Everett Herder, killed at Belleau Wood, buried at Marne Cemetery. That's his father, Albert Herder, famous American artist. That's his son. So this painting in the Gare de l'Est in Paris, France, to everybody who looks at it, it's about the French army, the French people in August 1914 going to war. Albert Herder asked if he could make a painting to give to France about this event, but he painted himself and his son in 1918 into it. And so his son is representing a young Frenchman, but in reality a young Everett Herder going to war, and here's his grieving father right here. All right, that's it. That's the American Army, and its role was unbelievably significant. That 100 Days Offensive, Meuse-Argonne, broke the back of the German army. And if we would have had, if they hadn't surrendered, which they did, I mean, the Kaiser abdicates, Hindenburg and Ludendorff go off, they leave it, they create a democracy and turn it over to some civilians to surrender. If they hadn't and they tried to fight for another 2 months, we would have been across the Rhine, occupying Germany, and things maybe would have been a lot different. And Pershing is going to regret that the war doesn't go on a bit longer. Had the war gone another 6 months into the spring campaign of 1919, the Americans would have been by the dominant. We would have had more men than the French by that time. 3 field armies, 3 million men. We would have been, I mean, everything could have been very different had it lasted a bit longer. Not saying we don't want it to last longer, a lot more people killed, but things could have been quite different. So, with that, I'm open to, I don't know what time we got, but if we open to any questions if you have. Sir?
How much of the Rhodes Cathedral was destroyed?
The entire roof, so everything from the roof down, and great destruction on the inside. But as far as the walls, they remain, probably 80% intact. So you go there to see that roof today. The roof is was rebuilt with metal, so not with stone. But because of that destruction, that happened in 1914. Because of that destruction, the way the Allies protected all the great cathedrals past that, after that time, is really impressive. You look at Amiens and some of the others, the sandbagging effort that went around all the pillars and all, it was amazing. But the destruction of the Reims, it kind of the city of Reims is called the sacrificial city of France. It sat right on the front line for all 4 years and was just, but it's in Champagne region. Miles and miles of Champagne coves underneath, and so the people lived underground for 4 years. Yes, sir.
I'm half Zimmerman, and I'd like to know about that Zimmerman telegram.
You're half Zimmerman, yeah. So Zimmerman is the foreign minister of Germany, and the Germans are looking. They know the Americans are coming in, or looking to come in, and the Germans are desperate because of the British blockade for food and resources, and so they got to break that blockade. They know they're going to use submarines to do it, and they know the Americans have said, if you use submarines again, unrestricted submarine warfare, we're coming in. And so he says, okay. Well, the Germans say, all right, we know that our action A is going to lead you to do B, well, we got to do something C. And their C was, let's get the Mexicans in and help them attack the other side. So that's why it's called the Zimmerman telegram.
Could you talk about the Lusitania and hidden arms?
Yes. So Americans we are sending stuff to the Allies, to Britain in particular, and France. And the Lusitania is a liner with a couple hundred Americans on it. In 1915 is sunk by the German submarines. But we've got arms and ammunition that we're sending to the Allies earlier in the war. And the Germans say that, we got submarine, our only way of attacking you is by submarine, and we can't get everybody off those ships, which they're supposed to. That's kind of the laws of war. But laws of war are great when you're writing them in in a convention, but how they work in the real thing isn't always the case. And so that ship sinking, though, really ramps up the Americans lose. I mean, everybody, thousands, some people killed, ramps up the Americans in an anti-German fervor. I say anti-German. What's the biggest population descendants in America? Is it English? No, it's Germans. And so the Germans and Irish are unbelievably anti-British, and so America is kind of two minds in this war, and until we do finally go in. One quick story about that too. When we vote to go to war, there's the first woman in Congress from Montana, named Rankin. She votes against the war. She's a complete pacifist. So she votes against the war on April 6, 1917. She just got elected in 1916. She comes into office in January. She votes against the war. What happens to her in the election of 1918? She's booted out, and so she's out. Then in 1940, she runs for Congress again in Montana, and she wins. And she comes in, and she's there. And so in December 7th, 1941, we're voting to go to war. What does she vote? She's against the war, So she does it twice. She's a two-term congresswoman, She's
Wasn't she the only one that voted?
in 41, yeah. In 1917, there were a lot, but in 1941, she's the only one, yeah. Jeanette Rankin, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Brian, you might just expand on that. What I found interesting about this is that the World War II, the grounds for World War II were set at this time in the Treaty of Versailles. Just, this inevitable, I guess.
Well, I don't think anything's inevitable, but it lays the groundwork for a, especially German feeling that they were treated too harshly. Everybody's at fault. Why are we the only ones being held at fault? Why are we paying these major reparations and others are not? And from a lot of the German civilian perspective, and even the militaries, when the war ended, we weren't in Germany. We weren't defeated. We were actually still in France and Belgium and all. Well, those things lead them to believe that they were treated way too harshly, and they may have been. That argument is an argument without end about that. I will say that I've read a lot of books on World War I. There's a book this year came out by a German historian called Pandora's Box. About 1,000 pages, but it's by far the best book on World War I I've ever read, and maybe one of the 2 or 3 best history books I've ever read. And that's saying a lot, but it's by a German historian, and it just goes into all the details of societies. Not so much military history, there is military history, but it's a lot more of societal stuff going on from all sides.
Just as kind of an interesting sidelight is when Pershing went over there to travel through, France and Belgium area to identify areas for our cemeteries, Eisenhower went along with him as his aide. So he had a chance to see much of the same terrain, which, less than 30 years later, we were going to be fighting over.
Yeah. Patton, all these guys. So Eisenhower and Bradley are not serving in combat in World War I. They're both doing stateside important stuff, but Eisenhower was able to go over then. Eisenhower, here's the thing, 50,000 Americans killed, but we lost 117,000 dead. The rest from sickness and wounds. Mainly those are from the sickness that happens in 1918, 1919, the Spanish flu, that goes around the world. More people die in India that winter than had died in 4 years of combat of World War I. And the Spanish flu was brutal. And more than half the men buried in the Voisin cemetery are from the Spanish flu, who died in France from Spanish flu. Eisenhower was in command of the armor training school at Gettysburg, Camp Colt, and he protected that town with put like a prophylactic around it, and was able to save it and that's why he and Mamie retired to Gettysburg later. But he did command he trained all the tankers that went over to France and served as tankers under Patton. So
later this year, I think October, I'm going to give a talk on my wife's great-grandfather, Brigadier General Joseph Lenahan. He commanded the 83rd Brigade of the 42nd Division when it deployed to France, and then later commanded the 153rd Brigade of the 77th Division, which we highlighted here, during the last end of the war and the occupation of Germany. But what I find fascinating with his story is just not that. He graduated in 1887 from West Point. His first assignments were with the Indian forts, what we call the Indian Territory in Montana. Then sent to Cuba for the Spanish-American War. Then was sent to the Philippines for the Philippine Insurrection. Came back to the Indian forts. Then sent to San Francisco for the earthquake recovery. This gentleman saw a tremendous change,
Absolutely.
in our country, and then eventually to France. He went from a period when the size of the regular army was about 25,000 to 2 million when the war ended.
Yeah.
I mean, what a change in this country.
Absolutely. One last thing about the occupation. 200,000 Americans stayed to occupy Germany for the next, it was supposed to be maybe for years, but very quickly we didn't. By 1923, we pulled everything out. We have 10,000 left. But my grandfather, the 42nd, went over there with, the new Third Army was created, and 7 divisions went and occupied Germany for another
The
year.
77th was one of them.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
Brian, thank you so much again for being our
Yep.
speaker. You gave
Thank you. Thank you. We've got, here's some of our upcoming trips. We've got 2 spaces left for this summer's 75th anniversary of Normandy, which, the youngest veterans are 93, but they'll still be out there by the hundreds of them.
How long are your trips? 2 weeks?
No, about, that one's about 9 days, 8, 9 days. The Gettysburg one is a Gettysburg and Antietam is a 3-day, but our typical, we start in London, we do Churchill Cabinet War Rooms, we go to Bletchley Park where the ultra-secret stuff was done. We go down to Southwark House where Eisenhower made the decision, let's go. That's on an active military base, but as a retired military, I can get access into that room. And then our Great War trip is a week long. Vietnam's about 9, 10 days. So that's some of our upcoming trips, which are all these are spectacular. As you can see from the scenery itself, I mean, it's a great place. Okay, thanks so much. There's a sign-up sheet. If you want to put your name on a sign-up sheet for information, Cheryl has it in the back too, and you can put your name on if you want to get we put a quarterly update out. Well, thank you so much for coming on his day and your interest in World War I. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.